Hey guys, it's Ryan here with HobbiesofaMan once again, and today we're going to be doing another Invincible arc review. We're going to be looking at arc 2, which is issues 14 to 24, which are contained here in this second omnibus. This is a hardcover ultimate collection, as you guys can see right there. These basically have about 10 issues of comic books, plus about 40 pages of extra content, usually just drawings with some information here and there. I usually don't read the information. I don't really care too much, but I really love looking at the illustrations, right? So, yeah, this is written by Robert Kirkman, and the artwork here is primarily and honestly actually only by Ryan Ottley, with the coloring here being by, let's see, by Bill Crabtree, with the lettering being by Russ Wooten, or Wotan, I guess. Kind of sounds like Odin, like the old name for Odin, right? This is published by Image under the Skybound imprint. I'm not really sure what the difference is, but, you know, it's Image at the end of the day. And the demographic here is teen plus. At least that's what I would call it, and I think that's what they say back here as well. So, yeah, it does have an adaptation, and the genre here is superhero. I don't know if there's like you could call this satirical or paradoxical or parodical, I guess. Like, this is not a parody, I don't think so. I don't think that's a genre that would apply here. But you could honestly say that it maybe is a homage to other superhero things. I don't know if that counts as a genre either, but that is important to kind of mention there, right? So, yeah, adaptations-wise, it does have one, like I mentioned earlier, because the episodes are coming out on Amazon as we speak, right? And ratings-wise, it's a 4.5 out of 5. Because I found some of the bits here to be a bit sloggy. I felt like they were too, like, long for me. And I think that's because the order actually is different from the anime or the animated show. And I didn't realize that in the first review. So some things that are happening here also still happened in season 1 of the show. And so they were kind of like the more boring aspects. And so there was a lot of moments where I was like, okay, there's a lot of text on this page. It doesn't matter because I already know the gist of it, but I still have to read it. And so there was like moments where I was not all that interested in what I was reading, but it isn't because the story is bad. It's because of previous exposure to this, making it kind of not the best, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't know if I explained that properly, but I hope everyone understands the concept of like being bored because you're familiar with something, right? So yeah, premise-wise, basically, Invincible, or Mark, is still reeling from Nolan's abandonment, as well as his mom, and they're kind of in this really deep funk, this horrible depression, right? However, Invincible, Mark, must learn to move on and shoulder the responsibilities that are now on his head because his father left, right? And so the reality is that his father leaving, especially him killing the Guardians of the Globe, has made Earth a much easier target, and also it has made crime feel much more significant because everyone that is taking over the role for the Guardians of the Globe is not doing a good job, right? And so Mark has to do a lot of work that maybe he shouldn't be doing, but that's kind of like the reality of being a superhero, right? So, okay, and so moving on to the plot line here, the time aliens are back, like the ones that age really quickly on Earth. However, they're not aging properly this time, and it's because they have special tools available to them now, thanks to all of the time that Nolan spent in their world, right? So they could kind of adjust to it. Eventually, they get beat back. The Immortal is watching Mark. He doesn't trust him because Mark is Nolan's son, right? And so he thinks that Mark will eventually turn out to be a betrayer as well. But Mark is like, no, man, I didn't even know anything about my dad. I'm not going to do that, right? So, yeah, responsibility is a burden that Mark must carry. And that is kind of like the main theme in this part of the story, where Mark just has to deal with being a superhero and how that affects him as he's growing and kind of going into this liminal space between high school and college, this kind of like transitionary period in his life as a person, and how that is being basically put to the side for his responsibility as a superhero. And it works out really well. I actually really enjoy that aspect of the story here. I think it's good. Mark goes back to school. He reconnects with William, with Eve, and with Amber, because Eve is basically not a superhero at this point anymore. Robot is the leader of the Guardians, and they're actually kind of losers now because they're not able to work as efficiently as the previous Guardians of the Globe. But to be fair, the previous Guardians of the Globe were basically like the best superheroes ever. besides Nolan. So it makes sense that this would suck, right? And so Robot is forced to step down from leadership position. The Immortal is set up as the leader now. And Mark has a bit of an identity crisis with Amber. Basically, he doesn't know what he wants. And he also knows that he wants Amber, but his reality as a superhero is going to be a difficult thing to deal with, right? And so eventually he decides to tell Amber. And this actually solves the issue because Amber thought he was like a drug dealer or something, which is a kind of funny plot line. And I actually find it to be much better than what they did in the animated show. But it does kind of lead to some of the sloggy bits. And also, it's partially because, although I like Amber as a character here, where I didn't like her too much in the show, because of the reality that I know that Adam and Eve is like the true pairing for Mark, I don't really care about the situation that's going on between him and Amber, right? Like I appreciate it from the perspective of like teenage drama and that being meaningful to the show, right? And to the story going on. But I was trying to look for the panel that I was thinking about, but I couldn't find it. But like I understand it being meaningful to the characters. I just don't find it meaningful to me as a reader because I already know what's going to happen later on, right? And so I think this might be a difficult thing to deal with if you're someone that watched the anime first and then went back to the comic book. But I don't think it'll be a issue for much longer. So that works out pretty well. Then Mark has to deal with basically this like mermaid people marriage situation. Then he has to graduate. He moves on to college, and we get introduced to Levi Langstrong, I think is his name, the guy that does the multiverse stuff from the first episode of season 2. And we get basically his whole story from season 2, from the first episode of season 2. So if you've watched that, you basically know what's going on here. He wants to use his multiverse powers in order to make things better, but he needs to have all of the information from all of his other versions. And in order to do that, he needs the help of the Mahler guys and the Mahler twins. And so he enlists their help. But when he's going through the process, he stops it prematurely to try to stop them from killing Mark because he doesn't understand Mark's powers. And that disfigures him, gives him like a huge brain and a lot of information. And a lot of that information makes it seem like Mark is the villain. And so there's an issue there, right? It basically turns him kind of crazy, makes him think that Mark is the reason he's like this. And so Levi becomes a villain. And it's pretty good. It kind of goes away for a bit. We get introduced to Titan, who is the guy that can like mold rocks around himself. And that kind of like underworld kind of like, Mark, I need you to help me get rid of these guys so that I can have a better life. But then he like betrays him, and it turns out that he wanted to be the Kingpin character all along, right? And so that happens as well. Mark ends up on Mars, which is a fun story. And we get this like Martian Manhunter kind of character thing, and it's pretty funny, but it basically ends up being rather inconsequential at the time, although I think it's going to be something that comes back later on. What else? Eve goes away. She stops being a superhero. The Reaniman plotline thickens because this is one of the early plotlines from the first season, but basically this is a plotline from later on in the story. It's basically when he's in college, there's that one guy that's like a Lex Luthor type character, and he is like a biologist and an engineer, and so he creates these robot men that they dealt with in one of the first few chapters, and it comes back and it becomes a bigger plot line here. So I really like this idea of Kirkman's like ability to interconnect like different plot lines across the time of this character so that you can have recurring characters that can become bigger threats over time for Mark. And I think that that's great. I really like that aspect of his storytelling, right? So, yeah, and then we get introduced to the robot plot line, which is the one where he wants to create his own body. And so he takes the guy that makes bombs explode, Rex explodes DNA, and he makes himself a new body. He has the Mauler twins help him, and so now him and Monster Girl, or whatever her name is, kind of have like a romantic situation here, right? So yeah, and then the story ends with Mark and Amber making up, and then we get a bunch of little origin stories for Alan the alien, for the Monster Girl, and for the Immortal, as well as Duplicate and Rexplode and Eve, right? So we get a lot of little interesting like intro stories, origin stories, and I like them a lot. I think that was a really nice way of ending the volume, providing you some extra information, and helping you connect with these characters that have been around for a while but are not exactly that important, right? So I like that. I think overall, really good stuff. In terms of characters, really, really good stuff. Amber is much better in the comic book here. I like her a lot. I think that they did a good job with recasting her, making her a black character in the show. But I don't like that they changed her storyline, because in the show, she comes off as a way worse character than in the comic book. In the comic book, she's basically a young girl that's in love with this guy, and this guy disappears, and she's worried about him, right? In the show, she just like isn't really willing to understand where Mark is coming from, and then when she realizes that he's a superhero, she's like, oh, okay, that's cool. It almost feels kind of like MJ, like the Michelle Jones character from the new Spider-Man movies, and I don't like that type of character. That kind of like, I'm too cool for school. I'm like edgy and sad, but I'm right because nihilism is the right way to go kind of characters. I don't like them. I think the Amber in the comic books is much better. But I do like that they changed her skin tone to make like the animated version a little bit more diverse feeling. Even though honestly, the original Invincible feels pretty diverse. Like there's a lot of different types of people, at least more so than you would think from something that's like 20 something years old, right? So it works out pretty well. I don't know why he chose that, but I do think that it was fine to do so, because it doesn't really make too much of a difference, right? But I like the character in the comic book better. Deborah deals with alcoholism. It's really rough. Mark basically breaks down with Amber, which I think is a really good moment of catharsis for Mark, and a really good way of developing the relationship, which leads to conflict later on in the third volume, where we deal with the fact that, hey, maybe Amber is not the right person for Mark. And I think that it works really nicely because this is a moment that cements, like, Amber is a good person, and she is a good person for Mark, but maybe Mark is not good for her because of, like, the differences in their lifestyles, right? So, yeah, and I think that Eve was a pretty meh character in this, because I don't really understand her like, desire to leave. Like, technically, she is correct. Her powers should be for more than just fighting crime, but she could still fight crime and solve all the other issues that she wants to do, because she is just that powerful. And so her kind of leaving doesn't really make sense, because it's not like anything bad happened to her in the first volume and in this volume. She just decided that she doesn't want to do that anymore. And I'm not really sure why. Like, I feel like the reasoning isn't perfect, or isn't like completely logical, and the fact that there is a missing part of the argument feels like not the best, right? But it is what it is. World building wise, it's good. There's a massive expansion of the sci-fi elements in the story, which I like a lot. Mars, the multiverse, stuff like that. Like, all of it is great. Yeah, like, really good. Like, I don't have too much to say, because ultimately it is just a superhero world, and that includes all of these things, but it's done really well, really organically, and I like that a lot. I think it's good. Artwork, it's phenomenal. I love the way Ryan Ottley draws characters. The colors are also pretty good, and there's a little bit of fan service aspects here, because Mark and Amber's relationship advances, right? And so there's some like titillating content here that is still pretty tame, but it is kind of like slowly pulling into a more mature kind of audience, right? So it works out pretty well. I like that a lot. Ratings wise, 4.5 out of 5. Like I said, it was a little bit sloggy in the later parts of the story here. Let me see if I can find one of the issues that I was talking about that shows that kind of like issue that I had with the amount of text and stuff. basically this one. I don't care about what's happening here because I know what the end game is, right? Like, Amber is a good person in a good relationship for Mark, but she's not the right person for Mark because Mark is not the right person for her. Like, even though she loves him, he's a superhero and she doesn't deal with that well. And so it's not the right relationship to have, right? And we know this. and we understand that Eve's the proper pairing for Mark eventually, right? And so I just felt like that page, which is dealing with like the consequences of right before Mark shows Amber the truth. It felt really long, and like there was like multiple issues that felt like that. So that's my issue with this arc. That's why it's a 4.5 out of 5 instead of a 5 out of 5. But overall, really good stuff. I love Invincible. I think it's a phenomenal series. If you want to read a superhero comic book that has a beginning and an end, and it isn't My Hero Academia, this is the one I recommend. So yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and see you guys later.